Hello, and welcome to American Motherhood, the podcast where we explore how society shapes the motherhood experience in America. I'm Bethany, a liberal mom of two in Central Ohio, on a mission to bridge the divide between liberal and conservative moms through honest, productive conversation. Today, I'm joined by Angie Hamberg, Superintendent of Westerville City Schools, to talk about the district's earned income tax issue on the ballot this fall. As a mom and a community member, I believe this levy is an important investment in our schools, our neighborhoods, and our future. At the same time, I know many of you have questions and concerns, and I wanted to make sure those were part of the conversation too. In this episode, you'll hear both the challenges our district is facing and the many things we have to celebrate. While I personally support the proposed 0.75% earned income tax, I also believe that supporting our schools means expecting transparency from our leaders. I hope this episode gives you confidence that a yes vote is a vote for our kids, our teachers, and our community's future. But no matter how you vote, I think you'll come away with a deeper appreciation for the people working so hard for our kids and our community. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe to American Motherhood on your favorite podcast app, leave a review, or share it with a friend. Please do really share it with a friend. My goal is to make this election more accessible to parents like us, and your support helps make that possible. Okay, let's dive in. Angie, thank you for joining us today. I'm excited to learn more about you and your work with Westerville City Schools. To start, can you share a bit about your background and what led you to become our superintendent?
Sure. Hi, Bethany. Thank you so much for asking me to be a guest on your podcast. I'm always excited to have an opportunity to share great things about our district with our community. I guess, jump in as you asked a little bit about my background. This is my 28th year in education, which seems crazy. I feel like it wasn't that long ago. We just had new teacher orientation and seeing some of those brand new 22-year-olds that are just getting started in the profession. And it doesn't seem like it was 28 years ago for me, but I guess it was.
Right.
So anyway, I've had a nice long career here in education in Central Ohio. This is my second full year that I'm starting here with the district. I came in March of 2024 as the interim and was hired on as the superintendent starting last August. So I had a great school year last year, and I'm so excited about the start that we're having this year.
Yeah.
Prior to coming to Westerville, I started out as a high school English teacher, and I taught mostly freshmen, some seniors. I taught speech class as well, a couple other electives. I went from that position into an assistant principal, athletic director at a high school level. Did that briefly. I have a lot of respect for athletic directors. That was not my favorite job. A lot of logistics that go into that. But I then became a middle school principal. Did that in two districts. The second district I was in was Big Walnut. I worked my way up there. They asked me to be the director of academics, did that for a couple years, asked me to be the assistant superintendent. And then when the superintendent retired, I became the superintendent there for 7 years. So I left there in 2022. Actually, my husband passed away. And so I stepped back for a couple of years from being a superintendent to work at the Educational Service Center. So I did some coaching and worked on some statewide math projects for the ESC. And then when Westerville reached out and asked about working as their interim, was excited to have that opportunity, which, as I said, then led to me being the superintendent. So it's kind of my pathway here. Happy to be here.
That's great. So can you tell us about your primary responsibilities as superintendent?
Yes. So my job as a superintendent would be similar to what a CEO does in a large company. We are the 11th largest district in the state. So we have a lot of people that are involved with the district. From our students, we have just over 14,600 students. We have, a couple thousand staff members, and then obviously our parents and our community members. So lots of people that are involved in the district. And my job is to kind of have that big picture, to work collaboratively with our school board to make sure that we are moving forward in a direction that's aligned with what the community wants to see. Our board members are obviously the elected representatives of our community. But trying to get input from community members in other ways, and then just trying to lead and manage our team to make sure that our kids ultimately are getting a great education here in Westerville City Schools.
Right. That's great. Okay. What excites you most about our district right now? And what do you think sets us apart from others in the region?
So I think this is just a really great community. There's a lot of
Mhm.
energy and excitement around our schools. I think what's been so awesome for me to learn since I've been in Westerville is just the diversity that we have here. I think provides such a rich experience for our students. We have kids that come from all different walks of life, whether it be different cultures, different families, different environments. We just have, and it's really interesting because I was confused before I came here. And I think there's a lot of confusion about what is the Westerville City School District because people think about Westerville proper.
Oh, yeah.
So the city of Westerville is only 12 square miles. We are 52 square miles. And so when you
Wow.
think, isn't that amazing? Like that really, when I heard that stat, that really resonated with me. So we're 52 square miles. We include, Genoa Township to the north. There's a lot of confusion in the district about Columbus because people think we are quote unquote busing in Columbus City Schools kids. We're actually not. Those are our kids. They've always been in our district, but the city of Columbus has annexed up into all of the suburbs.
Right.
So that's the point I always like to get out there. I didn't understand that before I came to the district, but
Right.
we have 52 square miles worth of kids. And so they go all the way from Columbus up to Genoa Township. But those are kids that live in areas that we have serviced for years and years and years, over 100
Right.
years. So I think that's something that gives us a really rich, unique blend of kids that we service.
Mhm.
And I just love getting out. Today, I was able to get out to all three high schools. It's the first football Friday night. So the energy is super high in the high schools today.
Oh, yeah.
Got to participate in North's pep rally this morning. Got to see the kids in the other two schools, and so just really neat to see that. At the same time, one of the things we're really working on is making sure that we keep that identity of we are all the Ville. So that's kind of been a value.
Yeah.
And I just got to record a video. I don't know if you saw it or not, but with kids from each of our three student sections. So they actually initiated and said, we would love to bring everybody together. We want to make sure that it's friendly rivalry and it's not turning into something ugly. And so they wanted to come together. They came up with here are rules, norms that we're going to follow at our events, and we want to educate our peers on them. So we made a fun video. But that was all student led. And so when you talk about what makes it special here, I think it's really, really cool that even though we're the 11th largest school district in the state and we have three high schools and five middle schools and 15 elementaries and some other auxiliary campuses, that we still can come together and say
Yeah.
we are the Ville. Our kids, we brought cheerleaders in from all three schools and they cheered together at our new staff orientation. That we are the Ville cheer. So the fact that there's still this community that our parents and our community members really rally around our kids, and it's still one Westerville, the Ville, but yet they also have their own special identities as individual schools. So that's something I think is really special here, and that I want to try to continue to protect that feeling and also help continue to grow the sense of community that our kids have with each other throughout the entire district.
Yeah, yeah, that's wonderful. So the idea of we are the Ville, is that new or has that been around?
I don't know that it's new necessarily, but our communications team last year kind of came up with this moving graphic that all of the names of each of our buildings goes into our logo shape. And so it has, as you look at that bell logo that we've had for years and years, now that bell is made up with the names of each of our schools. And as they come together and we do it in our videos, then it'll say we are the Ville. So that we've really tried to latch onto. It's really important that our schools feel like they have their own culture and identity. But also, one of the things I heard as I came in and talked internally, even with our team of administrators, of what do you think we can do to? We always want to get better, right? So how can
Mhm.
we continue to improve? One of the loud messages I heard was more of a sense of unity between the schools, so that we feel like one school district, not just that we were having this identity of a system of schools versus a school system. And so that is kind of what we've latched onto with the We Are the Ville piece.
Yeah.
And then we've also really latched onto it. Becca Yanni, who is our coordinator of extracurriculars, she also oversees all of our related arts programming. She's done a great job of working with the communications team and launching a sportsmanship initiative that's around We Are the Ville. And so now we're
Mm,
recognizing kids who are really showing those traits and qualities. And again, just trying to really center it around the idea of, we're all one community. So we want to build that sense of camaraderie with our kids.
I love that. That is so great. As a district committed to excellence, what are some of our short and long term goals?
So a big one that we're really focused on is what's called MTSS. It's in education's like a lot of fields. We get all the acronyms going sometimes in the
Right.
alphabet soup. So that is multi-tiered systems of support. And basically what that is creating a framework that we can make sure kids aren't falling through the cracks.
Hmm.
Obviously, that's always been a goal, but just being more intentional and strategic. So, MTSS, you're dealing with tiers, whether you're talking about academics, you're talking about social emotional growth for kids, behavior, that you're looking at these tiers, that you have ways to assess where kids currently are. And the idea is that your programming should be structured in a way that the majority of your kids should be successful in your typical programming. So,
Hmm.
a typical classroom, a typical other type of system or support, if you're talking behavior, should service the majority of the kids. We know there are always going to be kids that need additional intervention support, that maybe they're behind in reading, maybe, their behavior is not where it should be. And so it's having intentional assessments where we're able to see where they are. And for those kids who are not at their typical success level we would like to see in tier one, then it's providing additional interventions. So elementary, this is just comes naturally a little bit more to the way elementary is
Sure.
structured, and we've seen that a lot more at that level. But we're about expanding that into our middle and high schools, and
Mm.
so we've added some additional interventions for kids at that level, and just being more intentional in how we're systemically looking at all of our kids and trying to be more aligned across buildings. So our intent is if a family has a child in third grade, sixth grade, and 10th grade, we're using similar language with how we're operating around that. We have similar types of services. Obviously, a 10th grader's support in math is going to look different than a third grader's, but
Mm.
it's the same concept. And so
Right.
we've had a lot of great work happening around all of those areas, but just streamlining it more into a framework and being more intentional so that it looks the same across the district, and we can really track where our kids are and make sure if a kid is needing support, whether it's academic, behavioral, social emotional, that we have those supports in place for each kid for where they are. And that is not just behind, let me clarify. It's also if kids already are above where that tier one instruction is, how are we servicing them? Because
Right.
that's also a pet peeve of mine just throughout my career is, if kids are already mastering and excelling, why are they sitting there being taught that? So that's probably an area that, we have some growth in, but we
Hmm.
really shifted to providing a lot of our teachers who are doing those more advanced classes or have clusters of those advanced kids they're getting professional learning from licensed gifted teachers to learn how do you teach kids that are advanced because
Hmm.
they have different learning challenges. Sometimes we have kids who are gifted whose IQs are as far away from a typical IQ as a child that's cognitively delayed is the opposite direction. So we need to be able to adjust and make sure we're meeting the needs of all of those kids, regardless of where their performance is and what they need to be successful.
Right. Right. Oh, that's great. Um, in our curriculum night, my daughter's in first grade. I heard a lot about that too in our elementary
Oh,
school. It was
good.
great. Yeah.
That warms my heart.
Yeah.
That these are, that's a lot when you ask what my job is to make sure that we are aligning our resources and we're making sure that all the arrows are pointing in the same direction. So
Right.
that's when you really start to see change and you start to see things move is when everybody gets aligned and
Yeah.
we're able to move forward together, share best practices and all that. So it's exciting.
It's great. Now into the fun stuff. So, we just saw our state leaders decrease funding for schools all across Ohio. Of course, that includes Westerville. So, can you help put those numbers into perspective for us?
Yes. So what we have seen, honestly, in Ohio as a whole, it's really interesting. And I'm going to try not to get too far in the weeds, but I'm going to take you back a little bit. So school funding in Ohio has been ruled unconstitutional going back to the 1990s. based on the fact that it was done in a way that's called residual budgeting. So basically, whatever was left was given to education and divided out and handed out, and not based on what it actually costs to educate a kid. And also because there wasn't enough given at the state level, and so there's an over reliance on local taxes. Okay.
Hmm.
So that's been going on for a long time, and there's been so much dialogue at a state level. How do we change this? How do we fix this? So they've tried lots of different funding formulas throughout my career. The latest one that we've had, we are in the fifth year of, so it was intended to be a 6-year phase in of what's called the Fair Funding School Formula. And this formula was created with bipartisan leadership out of our legislation, as well as superintendents and treasurers across the state from little districts, big districts, different demographics. And so everybody came together and came up with this formula that was based on the actual cost of educating a child. And then they take into consideration what a district's able to pay. And they have a formula, it's very complex, as you can imagine, that is really looking at the property wealth in a district and the income levels of its residents. So, in a perfect world, this formula, if they put it all into play, would help a lot of districts across the state not have to rely as much on local property tax. Unfortunately, if you think about Westerville compared to the entire state, we talked earlier about Central Ohio or any of the major areas around the big cities throughout the state are very different than the rest of the state. And so in the Columbus area, cost of living is higher than it is in southeastern Ohio, for example. And so when they look at our wealth factor, they look at our property, they look at our income levels, even though those are both higher, right? So like you might make more, but it also costs more to live here. Compared to the rest of the state, we are doing significantly better. And so we are considered wealthy and able to pay more. Now, the irony of that, as I always tell people, is our district is 43% free and reduced lunch, which means 43% of our children are considered economically disadvantaged by the government.
Right.
So it's kind of a dichotomy there, right? So you have the on one hand, the state is saying you're very wealthy, but we also know we have families who are living in poverty, quite a few. And so it becomes very, very challenging in a unique situation. So what has happened then with this fair funding formula is they have updated our side of the equation. So they're saying, as they continue to look at our property value going up in Central Ohio, as they continue to look at incomes going up, but they are not updating the cost side of the equation. They're keeping the costs, they're at 2022. They're not updating them to 2025 cost sets. So it becomes challenging when they update one side of that equation and not the other. So as a result, with this latest funding formula that came out, we had hoped to see about $5 to $8 million more based on where that funding formula would have been. And I say 5 to 8 because it depends on how the cost sets were estimated, but they weren't updated at all. And so because they weren't updated, we actually saw a loss. So over the 2 years of the biennium, we will see 2.3 million less dollars where we had expected to see possibly even 8 million more dollars. So you can see there's about a, $8 to $10 million swing there. Also last year, because they didn't update the cost sets, we lost 4 million that we had not anticipated. So the last time we went up for a levy, because we were already deficit spending, we had looked at 20 million. Then we had another 4 million loss in state funding. So with that, I talked about the lawsuit back in the 90s, and the Supreme Court said our school funding is not constitutional in Ohio, and it's actually gotten about 10% worse. So the percentage that the state is picking up for schools has actually decreased since then. So, I mean, I think they've tried to make some transitions toward a fair school funding formula, but the problem is then they don't fund it all the way. And so you can have a formula, but if it's not being implemented or funded correctly, then it's still, what it does is it shifts that reliance back to the local taxes.
Right.
As a public school district, we are not able to raise revenues we don't have products we sell.
Right.
It's not like we just increase the price of our products or services. We are limited in getting additional revenue to either getting more revenue from the state or federal government, or we have to come up with it locally. And we only have really two options locally. The first option is property tax, which has traditionally been where schools have mostly relied. And then the other option is to do an income tax. And in the past, you could only do a traditional income tax, which would be basically on any income. And now there is an option that schools have where they can look at either a traditional or what is called an earned income tax, which is what we've opted to do. Our board voted to put on the ballot this November. And so that is the option that we're moving forward with. But I think it's important to note, I mean, we have two choices basically. So as costs continue to rise to offer the same services, we can either reduce services or we need more revenue. And if we need more revenue, we're not going to get more from the state. We hoped we would. And you know what? I do want to, I guess, just say here, Bethany, that just really appreciate so many people in this community came out and advocated to our state legislators, to our governor. Our state funding did not go as well as we'd hoped. We hoped that the fair school funding formula that they came up with would be fully implemented. We still would have needed additional local funds, but we wouldn't have needed as much. But I do think because of the advocacy of, and we were told by legislators, our community in particular really showed up and spoke up, and it did help. It could have been worse. Our governor did some line item vetoes. Had he not, we might have lost a lot of additional ability to collect our local property tax, and we would have had to have asked for other funding or had to make severe cuts.
Wow.
I feel like I just said a lot there. So I don't know. I hope I answered your question, but if not.
Yes, you did. That was great. You actually answered 3, so
Okay,
you knocked it out of the park.
There we go.
So let's talk about what the district is asking for. So we have a 0.75% earned income tax issue on the ballot this fall, and 0.75% represents 75 cents per $100 earned. As one example, a family earning $60,000 a year would pay $38 a month or $450 per year. As an earned income tax rather than a traditional income tax, it would not apply to retirement income, Social Security, dividends, or interest. And I didn't realize that the earned income tax was a new option. How new is that?
I don't know the answer to that. I could try to find out. I know that a lot of the districts that have had, so I would say roughly half the districts in the state have an income tax, and most of them are probably traditional. I know when we looked at it years ago, my previous district, that was the only option. I'm not sure when they made the earned income an option, but what we liked about it as an administration making a recommendation to our school board is, we have heard anecdotally, and it's a conversation at a state level, it's a conversation locally, that we know our senior citizens who are on fixed incomes that receive a pension, some type of retirement income, that they're struggling to keep up with the home value inflation. And so I know our treasurer, Nicole, she talked about, she got a call from a 78-year-old resident in the community who said, I just wanted to tell you thank you for not doing another property tax. I have a home that I built it in the 80s, lived here with my wife, who's now deceased. And if there were additional property taxes, I'm not sure I would be able to stay here. So those are the types of stories and things that we're looking at is, as we look at our older community,
Right.
people who are on those fixed incomes, what's a way to try to diversify. I mean, the reality is, nobody likes paying taxes. We understand that. We don't like asking for them, quite frankly. And so as we look at those two options, as I told you, we basically have two options. It was, well, we already know we have some property tax. And so can we look at a state level? We've heard from our legislators, they're trying to look at how do we change the over reliance on property tax. Now, I will say, as I talk with colleagues in other states fund schools differently. Everybody has slightly different. So basically, when you think about taxes, your buckets are pretty much, you have property tax, you have income tax, you have sales tax.
Right.
And so like we have legislators, they'll talk about, well, we should do it like Florida does. Well, Florida uses a lot of their sales tax. They have Disney World, they have the beach. I don't think we can compete with that. So it's kind of one of those things where if one of them's high, another one's probably low. So we are on the lower side at a state level of income tax. So, we talked about the senior citizens on a fixed income.
Right.
The other side of the equation would be our higher wage earners in the community.
Right.
We understand that they would be more impacted by this. We do want to share that in the biennium budget. The state legislators have decreased the tax rate for anyone earning over 100,000. So it will be a flat tax
Mm.
down at 2.75. So that will be decreasing by 0.75. So their wages over 100,000 will decrease at the same rate that this tax would be. So that's something important to point out. And again, I don't think any of us, the board, anybody that's involved with this, nobody wants to downplay the fact that we hate having to ask for taxes. The reality is in Ohio, this is the way schools are funded.
Right.
We, if we were able to get a higher percentage from the state, we could ask for less locally, but we're just not where we are right now.
Mm-hmm.
Inflation right now, this is really about keeping what we have. So as we look at costs continuing to rise with whether it's healthcare for employees, just like I know people are dealing with out in the private sector, it's the same for us. If it's our electricity is anticipated to double, if you haven't heard that here in Ohio.
No.
I guess it's primarily for I saw one of the news outlets had an article on about a lot of the data centers that are going up around the state are anticipated
Mm-hmm.
to use a lot more electricity, and so they are. We had heard that from our electricity, some of our providers here, but I've seen that even as a private resident that we can anticipate our electric to double. So when you think about we have 30 facilities here, and you think about just our electricity doubling, I mean, just so we're dealing with all those things that we're all dealing with in our home. So we're
Right.
certainly we're sympathetic to it. We understand it's just a challenging time right now, but the reality is for us to be able to we have made cuts. We've cut significantly in our operational budgets. We've cut 33 positions, but any additional cuts we would need to make if this isn't successful, we're really going to start getting into programming more. So we've tried to avoid, like, can we combine jobs? Can we, I think it's important to note, like, we didn't have people just sitting around. So
Right.
the positions that we have eliminated, there are certain areas where we know maybe the service isn't as quick as it was before because we have
Right.
less people in those departments. So it's definitely a challenge. We've tried to make those reductions where we can without impacting, kids as minimally as possible.
Right.
But if we're not successful in November, we are working on a list of potential reductions that we'll be discussing with the board. I know something you wanted to talk about today.
Yeah.
So that is a reality that we'll need to look at.
Right.
And we're just at a point where without that additional state revenue or local revenue, that we can't continue to offer the same services.
Right. Right. So when we talk about how this earned income tax would directly benefit students and classrooms, this is largely about keeping the services that we have. Do you think that we would be able to add back in some of those roles that we've had to decrease this past year?
I think it's something we would look at. If I'm being honest, we don't have enough built in to do that right now. I mean, we're just trying to preserve what we have at
Right.
this point. I think we're constantly evaluating if there are ways to do things more efficiently. We do on the operational side of the house. We do a lot of bulk purchasing through consortiums, so we get really good pricing with other districts, and so we're constantly able to utilize those resources and really evaluate that we're getting the best rates and prices. We've looked at, does it make sense to outsource different things instead of doing it in house? I'll give you an example. We actually spend a lot of money on. We have students who need specialized transportation.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they have health issues or behavioral issues that require through their individualized education plan that they have through special education that they need individual transportation.
Right.
And so a lot of districts will use third party vendors for that. And we do use third party vendors some where we will hire like a TriStar car to take them.
Mm-hmm.
But our district a few years ago implemented, and maybe you've seen them around town, called a My Van program.
Yes.
So those vans are much, much more cost effective. So we are able to add them to our fleet. We have our own in-house mechanics who do a phenomenal job that service them. And then we hire drivers that drive them. And in doing so, like we were looking at adding in six back in and it six figures in savings. I mean, it's
Right.
significant because transportation costs, and this is as I talk to my colleagues around the state, everybody is struggling with this. Our legislators know we're struggling because we're actually required to transport basically any kid that lives in our boundaries that attends a private school. We are able to declare and pay them money in lieu of that, but that's something people don't understand. So when they see our buses, different places outside the district, we are required to do that. And so, as the job market is becoming more challenging and finding staffing, we want to make sure we can get our kids to school. We've also got to get other kids to school, and then then you throw in the specialized transportation. So, I know it's a little bit of a rabbit hole there, but I wanted to give you an example of that's an area we've really looked at which one's more cost effective to do.
Yeah.
And it's actually more cost effective for us to operate our own program because of our size and our scale. And because we already have mechanics in house and they're able to service those, it's a way we've been able to save the district a lot of money.
Right.
And so that's an example of something. But we're constantly looking at, could we do without this because maybe we can add this back in? Or
Right.
those are all things that we want to continue as we get back on our feet. I'm always hopeful that at some point, they will figure out how to do state funding a little bit better. But in the meantime, we have to have stability and make sure we're able to provide because I think we've learned out of this last biennium process that,
Mm-hmm.
they're not going to ride in on their white horse and save us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately not. So do you feel confident that we will feel stability if this tax issue passes?
I think we'll feel some stability. I
Yeah.
mean, I think that's a great question. I think we are living in, I don't think there's anyone listening to this that would question the fact that we're living in very uncertain times right now.
Right.
And what's challenging and I don't want to paint a picture that we're unique as a school district. I think everybody feels this way,
Right.
but and we certainly respect that. And we understand that whether it's a business person in the community trying to navigate the same challenges, we're kind of all in this weird place right now as a society with everything. Right. So one of our challenges is there's lots of talk about is the U.S. Department of Education going to shut down? We found out the day before we were supposed to get almost $1 million in federal funds were going to be withheld.
Hmm.
And those are funds that we had already allocated, our Congress had already allocated to us, appropriated to us, and we had already allocated them for things like training on our new curriculum materials, for things like services for students learning English. So we were able to receive those funds this year,
Mm-hmm.
but we do get money from the federal government. There's been talk about if it shuts down, and that money go to the states, and then will that then flow to the districts? And I'm not very confident that that will happen based on some conversations that I've had with our legislators. So, I think we just have to constantly be looking at these different buckets of revenue and what they pay for, and constantly having kind of some backup plans and constantly be prioritizing. At the end of the day, we want to prioritize our resources to best service our kids.
Right.
And there are a lot of moving parts and more moving parts than we're used to on the revenue side. So I think anything we can have locally that feels stable and secure is very helpful for us. Another piece that our property tax, and there's a lot of conversation around property tax right now. Property tax is super confusing and tricky. I think income tax is a little bit easier for people to understand. But with property tax, because we're not on what's called the 20 mil floor, and our treasurer Nicole talks about this, and she'd love to give anyone who wants a school finance lesson. She'll give it to you at any time. She
Yeah.
loves this, but I'll try to give you the high level. So when our property values go up, it might rearrange who's paying what in the district, but the district doesn't see increases on that voted millage. We only see it on what's called inside millage. So even though we saw a 38% increase on properties, we saw less than 3% increase on our property tax. And people don't feel that because individuals might be paying a lot more of an
Right.
increase, but other people saw decreases in their property tax. So it's super confusing. Doesn't help us to try to, when we're trying to explain that to people. So that's one of the nice pieces. It's the income tax. If people's incomes grow, it grows. Conversely, though, if incomes go down, so like a property tax, if I take a job making a lot less money, my property tax is still the same, right? So that's one piece that we feel like is a little bit, that's an advantage to a property tax as well. Also, you mentioned the things that were exempt earlier. Employment is also exempt. So if someone were to lose their job, they would not pay the earned income tax, where a property tax you do still pay. So that's another piece I just wanted to point out.
Okay. Thank you for that context. That's all very helpful. So there's concern surrounding our eighth grade math proficiency. Can you tell us how our students' performance is measured and what strategies the district is using to help our students reach that proficiency in math?
Yes. So I mentioned earlier, we always want to be getting better.
Yeah.
And a lot of that work we're doing around MTSS is really about making sure that we are ensuring that we have this framework in place to catch kids if they're not where they need to be and to get them intervention. So that's, I'm starting with, I guess, what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the pieces that is really frustrating when you look at state data, which is where I'm assuming that's coming from, is our state ODEW's report card. So eighth grade math in particular is one that I know a lot of people in our state have frustration around. We have sixth and seventh grade math scores. And then in high school, we go to Algebra 1 and geometry.
Mm-hmm.
And at the eighth grade level, most districts, and so this is not just a Westerville problem. If you look, we're still doing better than this. Our performance above the state stays about the same, even though eighth grade kind of tanks there, because everybody tanks. Because what happens, and I don't understand why they do this, and I've never gotten a good answer why they do this, but I would say in most districts, definitely in the suburban type districts like we have, about the top third of math students in eighth grade are taking Algebra 1.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you would think that they would put those kids' scores in with that eighth grade math indicator. You would think if they're not going to do that, they would report it separately and like share that that's what they're doing, but they don't do that. So when you look at that eighth grade math score, it's basically pulling out the top third of our kids who are typically performing really well on those tests. They're not taking the eighth grade math test. They're taking, because they're taking Algebra 1 and getting that high school credit,
Mm-hmm.
which we want to be able to do for them. It's the right thing to do. We're not going to change that practice because the state's reporting doesn't match up with that. But it's frustrating because it makes it look like none of our kids are performing well. Now, having said that, even if you pull out that top third of kids, would we like to see the other kids performing better? Yes. And that's part of what we're trying to do with MTSS. So if they're
Mm-hmm.
not where they need, any of our kids are not where they need to be, then we need to be giving them intervention in that area. And I keep talking about reading and math. I mean, certainly there are other subjects that are important, but reading and math, we know, are those foundational skills that really set them up to be successful. With math, you're impacting now chemistry and physics and just all types of different STEM related fields. And obviously with reading, reading's the foundation of all other learning. So we want to make sure their reading and math skills are where they need to be. That's what they really look at a federal level as well. But the way we do eighth grade math reporting in the state does not make a lot of sense. So I think it's important to note that's a test. We look at it. It's important. But we're also, as part of our assessments we're giving with our MTSS process, we are looking at other assessments and adjusting. Also important to note, if you follow the eighth grade cohort, when they go up as ninth graders, they always do a lot better on the algebra test. So same group of kids will struggle across the state in eighth grade and in Westerville specifically, but then when they go to ninth grade, there's a rebound.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
I'm not one to sit here and blame a test and make excuses, because certainly we have room to do better, and we are trying to put some things in place to help our students perform better. But I also think it's important to note that's why that one looks like such a anomaly compared to our other
Right.
performance areas.
Right. It's misleading for sure. That's helpful. How has enrollment changed over the last decade, and how has that impacted our expenses?
Great question. So Enrollment is actually, I just saw an article today that enrollment in public schools across Ohio is down across the state because birth rates are falling.
Right.
So I think that's important to note. But this district has been participating in the state's construction OFCC project in what's called an early. There's an opportunity to jump in before we are eligible for funding. So we have not been eligible for any funding for buildings. The state has been doing building projects since the 90s, and they do it by financial need. And so we talked about that wealth factor. So we're
Right.
we're down on the list of when we're eligible, but we're able to be in this ELP program and basically bank credit so that when our number comes up. So as we do work on projects, we have to have enrollment projections done by the state because when you're putting state money into buildings, they want to make sure that you're putting money in the right places. So we actually had some enrollment projections done by them prior to COVID.
Mm-hmm.
And based on those projections, we thought we would have more kids now than we do. However, I think it's important to note whether we grew or didn't, because we've kind of stabilized and now we're heading back up. So we lost some kids around COVID time. A lot of districts did. As we look back, our classes that we have now are back to about the size that they were prior to COVID. But when we talked about building, because we hear this a lot, right? Like, oh, you didn't need Minerva France, you didn't need to build Minerva Park. But prior to those buildings opening, a couple things I want to highlight on enrollment here. Our middle schools were huge. So when you look at what is recommended size for middle schools, what is recommended size for elementaries, we had some buildings that were quite a bit above that. And so what happens when, and I was a former middle school principal, so I feel like I can speak to this, but and I have my own one of my own children still a middle schooler, and they're unique, and I love middle schoolers, but I always say it takes a special people to teach them and love on them all day. But
Yep.
they are when you get 1,000, when you're pushing up on 1,000 middle schoolers in a building, becomes very, very challenging to have a culture that is probably in line with what this community would want to see. So I know
Right.
that as I talk, I wasn't here,
Right.
obviously, because when I came, Minerva Park had just opened. But from what I have been told, our existing middle schools were just crowded. The hallways were jam packed. Every nook and cranny was filled with classes, and it just made it logistically and managerially very challenging when I walk in like Walnut Springs and think of there being over 900 kids in that building with those narrow hallways. Like it's a really nice size right now, and I think providing our kids with a better experience being the size that our schools are now. So my understanding is, a lot of that was trying to get a middle school, first of all, down in the southern part of our district where a lot of our kids live. And again, that is part of our district. I just want to point that out again, even though it's outside of Westerville proper, that 12 miles of Westerville, still we have a lot of kids in the southern part. So getting a school down there,
Mm-hmm.
getting the sizes down in our other ones. And then the other piece that's important to note is while our enrollment now has been pretty flat since COVID, we've gone up about 100 kids or so a year in the last few years. We're seeing an increase in the needs of our students who need specialized learning centers that are moving in. So
Mm.
we're having more and more kids who come to us who already have an individualized education plan, an IEP,
Right.
that calls for legally a smaller ratio in their classroom. So, our typical classrooms, we're looking at 26, 27, maybe up to 30 in the higher grades. And this might be a class that needs 8, 12, or 16 kids with 1 to 4 adults, depending on the disability category. So just
Mm.
since I've been here, we have added so we have 15 elementaries. We've added 8 specialized learning center classrooms to accommodate preschoolers we have coming out of our required special needs preschool program.
Wow.
And these are kids that need extra support. They're not able to be successful in a typical classroom with 28 kids in it. So we had to add these units across our elementaries. And so when we look at enrollment, the state actually does what's called weighted enrollment. that has gone up significantly. So when you think about the need for space, the need for staffing, the ratio is a little bit different when you have more kids with special needs. We are seeing that since the pandemic. There have been also, and again, kind of conversations I have with my colleagues from around Central Ohio, there have been a lot more behavioral challenges. And so we are
Hmm.
seeing more and more kids that need more behavioral support at school. And, sometimes people will say, like, oh, well, that's, you shouldn't have to do that. Well, the reality is, if a child has barriers to learning, not only are they not learning, so whether it's they're hungry or they are having mental health issues or behavioral issues, if we're not removing those barriers, they're not learning, and they're often distracting other kids from learning as well. So the reality is we do have more and more of these issues in our schools. And I personally am very passionate about, we owe it to every child to make sure they have what they need to be successful. If people want to argue that, I guess it's looking also at the fact that they're disrupting other kids too. And so
Hmm.
we need to make sure kids are in an environment where they can be successful and we're giving them what they need to be successful learners.
Hmm.
And so those needs have increased. And as you look at our enrollment, you'll see there are more and more children who need those supports. We also have a lot of students who are learning English, and we've had a good success rate with kids testing out of needing those services. But we also, when they need them, we need to be able to provide them so they can be successful too. So those are all things that our enrollment has changed. We've also gotten a higher number of kids that live in poverty. And again, when we
Hmm.
think about removing barriers for kids so they can learn and providing additional resources, that all goes hand in hand as well. And so while our overall enrollment has not increased, we're seeing, that's when we talk about increased student needs, that's what we're talking about. We're seeing more
Hmm.
children moving in with IEPs. We're seeing more preschoolers coming to us with IEPs, and we want to make sure we're able to meet all their needs so they can be successful. But that does take more staffing, whether it's teachers or related services. We have more kids that need speech services. We have more kids that need occupational therapy. We have more kids that need psychology services.
Hmm.
So it's just, that's kind of what's really added. And I think that's mainly what I wanted to hit there on the enrollment,
Yeah.
is, I guess, pointing out that while we didn't grow based on the state's projections, and I think that's important to point out, there's been some things out there like, oh, we're lying about our enrollment. We don't have a reason to lie about our enrollment. We weren't lying about saying we were going to have all these kids. A pandemic happened, and that did adjust a lot of people's enrollment. More
Right.
people chose to go online after they'd done it during the pandemic. So again, I think we're kind of recovering from that. We are entering an era in our state where there are lower birth rates. We're a little more landlocked here as a
Hmm.
suburb, and so we're not seeing lots of developments go up, which is, fortunately, because when you are growing fast, that's another piece you have to manage. We know
Right.
some of our neighbors in other parts of Central Ohio are trying to manage buildings all the time. Olentangy has obviously had to build lots of buildings over the years, so we don't have that challenge, which is nice. But I think it's important to mention that, my understanding and lots of conversations, and I certainly don't profess to be an expert on the district, having not been here long, but my understanding is when they built Minerva France and Minerva Park, it was because we already had crowded spaces. We already had a lot of kids in buildings. We weren't able to add those specialized learning classrooms that we needed across the district. And so by opening those two buildings, we've been able to do that. We've been
Mm.
able to spread our kids out, and we've been able to serve them more
Right.
effectively and provide them with a better experience as students. And that's our
Right.
goal.
Right. Right. Absolutely. And when you do look at the enrollment numbers, now I haven't verified these numbers with you or anybody in the district, so tell me if I'm incorrect. But what I see is that we lost maybe 700 students in this projection, which is what, 5% of our district.
I think what really was impactful, our former deputy superintendent, Scott Dorn, who retired, who was a number spreadsheet guru,
Yeah.
really looked at that. And so we have over 1,000 classrooms. And so when you
Yeah.
think about that, and you think about what does that mean in a district our size as far as needing less things, if you spread those kids out over all of our classrooms, it's less than one kid per classroom. So if you
Hmm.
think about what that experience looks like, So now I have 27 kids instead of 28. I
Right.
have 22 kids in the first grade instead of 23. Like, it doesn't drastically change what we need to provide.
Right.
It sounds like a lot of kids. When you think about numbers in a district our size, it's just always important to remember the scale of where we are. So certainly, having 700 less kids versus 700 more helps us to
Hmm.
not be as crowded, but it's not a drastic change. Um, but I just wanted to clarify because I think that some of the narrative out there is, well, we didn't need the buildings that we opened because we didn't grow as much as we thought we would.
Hmm.
Well, thankfully, we didn't grow as much as we thought we would, so we're not needing more because we might have needed more down the road, right? So I think what it's done for us is it's important to remember that the experience kids were receiving because of the crowdedness prior to that was what was alleviated and helped by the fact that we opened those buildings.
Right. Absolutely. And then I, as a mom, want you to be focused on a child's success in the school system, but we can also talk about how that feeds into their success in society, right? And that impacts everybody in our community. We want every child to be able to learn and be able to grow and bring their skills and knowledge back to our community. And obviously, that is the broader goal in all things.
Absolutely. And I have a huge passion as I think you do as well as we've chatted, but I have a huge passion for public education. And I think we're getting into this time in our society where I hear people say, well, I shouldn't have to pay taxes because I don't have kids, or my kids are grown, or this or that. The reality is, public education is about all of us
Mm-hmm.
because if we are not raising a generation of children, and when I say we, I mean us as a society, are not raising a generation of children who are ready to go out into the world and be productive citizens of our country, our community as a whole, then we're all going to pay the consequences. So, I always talk about, do I want my doctor, my mechanic, my whoever I interact with in my life, I want them to have a good education. I want them to be good critical thinkers. I want them to be able to collaborate and problem solve on whatever it is I'm bringing to them. I want to live in a world where people are empathetic and kind and caring and want the best for their fellow citizens. And so those are the kind of things, should be important to all of us because if we don't give our kids that strong foundation to be able to be, we're also in a world, it's really interesting because we're growing up in a time where kids have to learn discernment skills even way more.
Mm,
I was talking to a seventh grade class and I said, when I was a kid, we were talking about technology and just interacting with it. And I said, when I was a kid and I did a report, I remember I had to do a report. This is fifth grade.
mm-hmm.
And I did a report on Hawaii. We were doing state reports. And my mom had to drive me to the library. And they had outdated books. Hawaii wasn't even a state yet in some of them. And so that was what I had as my resources to do my report. And I said, you guys now like have anything you want to know about Hawaii, you can find online. But unfortunately, some of it's not true.
Right.
And you have to sift through and discern all these different things. So it's really about teaching kids to be critical thinkers because there's so much misinformation out there, and just because it's online doesn't mean it's true. And so we're in this era where we're trying to raise kids who, there's always all this talk about public schools and indoctrinating, and I don't know too many people who want to do that. I think most people really want to teach kids how to think.
Right.
Like, your opinion is your opinion, but how do you get to it? And hopefully you get to it by being a good critical thinker and evaluating what people are saying and coming to your own conclusion. And that's what we owe kids.
Yeah.
We aren't here to tell kids how to think. I'm sorry, we're not here to tell them what to think. We're here to tell them how to think, how
Right.
to be good thinkers. And that's what our society needs. And as I continue to get older and think about my life when I'm older and retired and the next generation's coming up, like I want good thinkers who are caring people who are running all the different aspects of the world. And that's what we're trying to create and raise.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. So, very quickly, I know that obviously there's a lot of insight that you can gain from attending or just viewing the school board meetings online, but how are there other ways that the community can gain greater insight into the budget and finances?
So there's definitely a lot of information on the webpage for the treasurer's office that has all that financial stuff. It's complex. I
Yeah.
mean, I would say there are a few people, even in our organization, who work here who could probably talk fluently about it, right? Obviously, Nicole Marshall, our treasurer, would be the best at it. I do okay.
Yeah.
You get past that, and a lot of people are like, yeah, I have no idea. So I think I would encourage people to reach out if they have questions. Nicole, especially, is a great resource, and she just, treasures, and I'd say this if she's sitting here, but they get geeked out over that stuff. So she loves any opportunity to talk about it.
Right.
But we're happy to answer those questions. We understand that it is so complex. School funding in Ohio is not easy. It's very
Hmm.
complex and confusing. I didn't really understand it until I was a superintendent. So when I was a principal or working as a director, I mean, I just had a very minimal understanding because, again, you're looking at federal, state, different types of local revenue, and then the expenditure side is just as complex what we're able to do. So if people have questions, please reach out, please ask. We're happy to answer those. We're also trying just to get out more information. So it doesn't have to be on just finances, but regardless, we would prefer people reach out and ask their questions. I know that we're in this era where people like to go online and just, like make up things.
Yep.
And
Yep.
so if you don't know, ask us. We're happy to have the conversation. We're happy to do what we can to help develop an understanding, whether it's financially, academically, whatever. We're happy to talk.
Right. Two more questions for you.
Okay.
How do you keep your team motivated when facing these financial challenges?
I think we are really trying to focus right now on reminding each other to get out and spend time with kids.
Mm,
So I I will be honest with you, I don't get my bucket filled by going out and talking about the levy. That does
yeah.
not fill my bucket. It's very important work because if we don't have the resources, we can't do the important work for the kids.
Right.
But our team, like our buckets get filled by seeing kids and seeing them learn and seeing them grow and seeing them excelling. And so, I just got out this morning and was able to get to all three high schools and see
Mm,
all the kids before it's the first football Friday night tonight. So
right.
all energy is super high in the high schools and
Yeah.
was able to get out and interact and see some people. And that fills my bucket. I have a superintendent advisory group that my team, we all go and meet with the kids. They come here, they're coming here on September 10th for their initial meeting of the year. And then we go out to each of their high schools and meet with them. We go out and read books to the littles, and they're a lot of fun because they always say, like, are you the president? Whose mom are you? What do you work here? And so then I try to explain what a superintendent is, and that's fun because got to really reframe how you explain that to 5-year-olds. But they're a lot of fun. Like I had a 5-year-old last week, kindergartners at Robert Frost. I sat and talked to them while they were eating lunch, and one said, "Can you guess how old I am?" And I said, "I bet you're 5." And she said, "How do you know that?" I was like, "Well, I know kindergartners are, usually around 5." And the girl beside her said, "Well, I'm not 5. I'm 5.5."
Oh, right.
So,
Very good
just
distinction.
just that whole interaction, and then they wanted to guess how old I was, and first I was 20, and then I got up to 72. So
Right.
it's just fun, that's the stuff. And so I think we try within our team to remind each other when we get too mired down in the work that's not fun that we
Hmm.
got to get out and see kids. When we get out and see kids, it just kind of fills our buckets, and we're ready to go again with some of the other not so fun stuff that's necessary.
Right. That's great. You're speaking my language there. I've got a 4.5-year-old and a 7-year-old. So yes,
They're
it's
very important to get that half in there.
yes, it is.
I'm on the far end of the spectrum now. I've got oldest is 22, and just seems like yesterday she was 5. So
I know it. What is one thing about our district that you hope never changes?
I think I'll take it back to where we started when you talked about what I like about it. It's just
Yeah.
I love the flavor, the unique flavor that's here from all the different people. There's so many different people, and sometimes with the adults that manifests itself in different ways, but walk and sit with a table of kindergartners who are from different cultures, different backgrounds, and they're just friends
Right.
and they're fun and they're excited to see you. And that is truly why we're here, to make sure, regardless of where a kid comes from, that they are able to have a great experience. And, our motto is where you belong. And I want kids to feel like they belong here.
Mhm.
I hope that doesn't change.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And we'll leave it here. Thank you so much for your time and your insight. This was so valuable.
I appreciate you. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share all the great things happening here in Western.